The courtroom hummed with whispers, low enough to hide behind politeness yet sharp enough to cut deep. She stood there, blonde hair catching the dim light, while her own family leaned toward each other, muttering words that stung more than shouts. Ever could, drama queen. The phrase floated, cruel and dismissive, as if her pain were nothing but theater. Her husband sat across the room, his expression carefully crafted, concern painted in broad strokes over the sly glint in his eyes. To everyone else, he was the wronged man, charming, wounded, deserving of sympathy. But beneath the surface of his practiced facade, she saw him for what he truly was, a betrayer cloaked in charm. She felt no need to defend herself, not yet. Her silence was her shield, her restraint her weapon. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. The signs had always been there, subtle cracks in the glass that she refused to see until they shattered. Late nights explained away by work emergencies, credit card bills with charges she never made, the faint perfume that lingered on his jacket, never hers. At first, she told herself it was nothing, the kind of small misunderstandings every marriage endured. But now, sitting in the cold echo of the courtroom, she recalled each detail with the clarity of hindsight. His overconfidence had been his greatest mistake, because he had believed she was blind. And so she smiled softly to herself, letting him continue his performance. Let him believe she was the fool. For now, the realization came in waves how deeply his lies had wound through her life, how carefully he had built his mask of devotion. The charm that once dazzled her now revealed itself as theater, lines rehearsed and performed to perfection. Every memory of tenderness now twisted under the weight of truth. She did not cry. She did not break. Instead, she replayed the red flags, seeing them for what they always were. Warnings she had silenced to preserve the illusion of love. The shock that once might have destroyed her was gone. All that remained was a cold determination to unravel his deception piece by piece. And so she began her work, quietly, methodically, like a sculptor chipping away at stone. Bank statements tucked into folders, text messages carefully screenshotted and saved, witnesses who had seen what he thought no one noticed. She moved with precision, never rushing, never stumbling, pretending still to trust him. In his presence she was soft, compliant, the same woman he believed he controlled. But when his back was turned, she became the architect of his downfall. Each file and photograph another brick in the wall closing around him. The tension grew sharper, tighter, yet she held it close, knowing timing was everything. His arrogance became his undoing. He gloated, laughing in private conversations about how easily she bent to his will. He thought her silence meant defeat. He believed his power absolute, his secrets untouchable. But arrogance makes men careless, and one slip gave her more than she could have hoped for, an email, reckless and damning, that tied every thread of his deception together. He handed her the key to his own destruction without realizing it, sealing his fate with the same overconfidence that had once charmed everyone in the room. She tucked the final piece of evidence into her folder, her calm smile never faltering. The trap was set, and then the shift came. The courtroom, once heavy with whispers mocking her, now grew tense with silence as she began to speak. One by one, she laid out the evidence: bank records, text chains, the incriminating email. Every lie he had spoken cracked apart under the weight of truth. Gasps echoed as family members leaned forward, their whispered judgments dissolving into stunned disbelief. He, the husband who had strutted with pride, suddenly faltered, his mask slipping as the room turned against him. The title of drama queen melted away, replaced by something heavier. Respect. The unraveling was swift and merciless. His reputation, so carefully polished, shattered in real time. Each word from her lips was a blade, but delivered with calm precision. Never cruelty. He stammered, tried to deny, but the evidence was undeniable, a noose of his own making tightening around him. The court saw him now for who he truly was, not the wounded man he pretended to be, but the liar who had built his empire on deceit. She remained composed, untouchable, letting him drown in the weight of his own betrayal. When it ended, he was nothing more than the ruin of a man who thought himself untouchable. His schemes exposed, his name tarnished, his arrogance dismantled. Before the very people who once praised him, she did not gloat, she did not shout. She simply stood with dignity intact, her silence as sharp as any verdict. The whispers that once mocked her were gone, replaced by a quiet awe at the strength she had carried all along, and as she stepped out of the courtroom, the air outside felt different, lighter, freer. She carried no bitterness, only the knowledge that patience had delivered her the sharpest revenge. She rose from the ashes of betrayal stronger than she had ever been, proving not only to them, but to herself, that silence, intelligence, and restraint could break even the most ruthless deception. The storm had passed, and she walked forward into her new beginning, untouchable. Her family's whispers cut deeper than any insult spoken aloud. They leaned toward one another with pitying glances, shaking their heads as though her tears and silences were melodrama, as though the charming man who once held her hand was incapable of cruelty. He sat across the room, all polished smiles and sympathetic sighs, his voice low and honeyed whenever he addressed them. They nodded, comforted by his calm words, blind to the sharp edge beneath his carefully chosen phrases. To them, he was the victim, and she, his ex-wife, was the problem. A woman too sensitive, too emotional, too dramatic to accept the end of a marriage. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She let them believe their narrative, wearing the role they gave her like a mask, because she knew the truth and she knew patience would turn their judgment into regret. Every dismissal, every roll of the eyes when she tried to speak, carved a deeper certainty into her mind. What they called weakness, she recognized as clarity. She replayed his stories, those explanations to smooth, to rehearsed, and they began to fracture under scrutiny. His business trips, his vague expenses, the sudden gaps in shared accounts. Her heart no longer searched for reassurance, it sought patterns, connections, the shape of a lie. She smiled when he boasted, nodded when he sighed with feigned exhaustion, and pretended to be soothed by his empty affection. But beneath her silence grew a sharp awareness, a weapon waiting for the right moment to strike. The full truth unveiled itself like a tapestry being unraveled thread by thread. Hidden accounts she was never meant to see, carefully stashed assets buried under false names, messages that spoke of late-night rendezvous masked as long hours at work. Each discovery carried the weight of betrayal, not because she had ever doubted her instincts, but because he had so skillfully wrapped cruelty in the disguise of love. Flashbacks surfaced, the gift that arrived unannounced, suddenly explained as work gratitude, the weekend away he claimed was for a conference, the way he guarded his phone as though it held the crown jewels. They were not isolated incidents, but pieces of a puzzle that now fit seamlessly together, forming a portrait of a man who never intended to be faithful, never intended to be honest. She did not rage. She did not crumble. Instead, she set herself to work with the precision of someone who knows the endgame belongs to those who plan. Bank statements were tucked into folders. Receipts were copied and hidden away. Dates, times, and conversations were charted with meticulous care. She became both witness and archivist of his downfall, building a case so seamless that no excuse could pierce it. He still looked at her as though she were naive, still spoke down to her in that indulgent tone reserved for children. She let him believe she was powerless while every step he took tightened the snare. His arrogance swelled with each passing day. He laughed in private, mocking her restraint, sneering to friends that she was too dramatic, too fragile to pose any threat. She'll cry and move on, he scoffed, believing himself untouchable. That very arrogance blinded him to his own missteps, a misaddressed email, a careless slip of his tongue, an expense he thought buried each became another gift he unknowingly placed in her hands. He mocked her as he always had, but she smiled back, silent and steady, knowing he had already sealed his fate, the day came when the silence fractured. The courtroom, once filled with doubters and skeptics, leaned forward as she rose. Calm, steady, her voice carried a weight it had never held before. One by one, she laid down the evidence, each piece a hammer against the fragile mask he wore. Bank transfers, hidden investments, the messages he thought erased, unveiled without anger, only certainty. The more she spoke, the paler he became, his charm collapsing under the burden of truth. Gasps spread through the room, the family who once mocked her now silent in shock. The title of dramatic dissolved as swiftly as his composure. His downfall was not loud, but it was devastating. The lies he spun, the sympathy he harvested, the image he so carefully cultivated shattered before everyone who once admired him. He stammered, grasped for explanations that no longer held weight. Drowning in the very deceptions he had built, she did not revel in his destruction. She simply stood, composed and resolute, her dignity a mirror reflecting his ruin back at him. The more he struggled, the clearer it became that his empire of lies was built on sand, and the tide had finally claimed it. When the verdict came, it was not just a legal one, it was the final collapse of a false world he had forced upon her. She walked out of that room unbroken, her silence having spoken louder than his every boast. Those who once dismissed her now looked with new eyes, seeing strength where they once saw fragility. She carried no gloating smile, no lingering bitterness. She carried freedom, and in the end, it was not the evidence alone that destroyed him, nor the whispers turned into gasps. It was her patience, her calm, her refusal to be baited into despair. She had risen from betrayal not weakened, but sharpened, and his ruin was the inevitable result of his own arrogance. As she stepped into the light of her new beginning, she knew the truth she had always held close. The quietest revenge is the one that leaves you stronger, while your enemy crumbles under the weight of his own lies. Her family's laughter stung worse than his betrayal. They dismissed her pain with casual waves of the hand, their loyalty gravitating toward the man who had perfected the art of charm. He sat among them, smiling easily, speaking in tones so measured and smooth that even lies sounded noble. "She exaggerates," he said softly, and they nodded. To them, he was dignified, patient, and endlessly forgiving. To her, he was a mask stretched over deceit. She did not defend herself. She allowed their ridicule to echo, wearing it like armor. Each mocking glance, each whispered comparison only strengthened the cold determination rising inside her. The days that followed sharpened her suspicions. He grew careless in small ways, late nights cloaked in half-truths, phone calls answered in hushed tones, business trips that ended with receipts from places no conference had ever been held. At first, she had tried to ignore it, to trust the image he projected, but the inconsistencies stacked neatly, and denial could no longer drown them out. His confidence only made the truth clearer. He believed himself untouchable, protected by her silence and his charm. She played the part of the blind wife, nodding gently, smiling faintly, hiding her sharp gaze behind a mask of weariness. One by one, the illusions unraveled. Offshore accounts tucked away under false identities, tax filings that bore the fingerprints of fraud, hotel reservations, dinners, and gifts tied to women whose names he had never once spoken aloud in their home. The man who swore love as if it were sacred had instead woven a net of deceit that stretched into every corner of their life together. She remembered the flowers delivered with no card, the perfume clinging to his jacket after a meeting, the way his phone was locked with a code he never shared. Each memory, once dismissed, now glared back as a warning she had chosen not to see. There was no outburst, no confrontation, only a calm acceptance that his world was made of lies, and it was already beginning to crack. Rather than collapsing under betrayal, she began to build. Quietly, methodically, she reached out to a lawyer whose reputation was discretion itself, and an accountant skilled in tracing what others worked hard to hide. Together, they created a silent ledger of his sins, receipts copied, emails preserved, transfers tracked down to the last cent. She lived beside him as though nothing had changed, smiling across dinner tables, accepting his excuses with feigned ease, while beneath the surface she crafted a weapon of truth too sharp for him to escape. He mistook her quiet for surrender, never noticing the fortress she was assembling in shadows. Blinded by arrogance, he grew bold. The wealth he had stolen and hidden, he flaunted openly, as though daring her to notice. New suits, expensive watches, lavish dinners that he paid for with funds he believed untouchable. He mocked her in front of friends, smirking as he told them she would leave with nothing, that she was too weak, too fragile to fight. His laughter was the sound of his undoing. Every careless boast, every public display became another stone in the trap closing around him. He fed her narrative, never suspecting it was she who had written the ending long before. She played her role flawlessly. When he sneered, she smiled. When he mocked, she nodded. She folded herself into his story of her weakness, giving him the illusion of victory. But beneath the mask, every detail of his life was being documented and assembled into a case so airtight it would choke the last breath of his false confidence. He believed her silence meant defeat. In truth, it was the sound of the walls closing in. The day of reckoning arrived, not with a scream but with precision. In court, his smirk faltered as evidence stacked higher than his denials. The emails, the transfers, the hidden accounts all laid bare with calm clarity. The family who had mocked her sat in stunned silence, their once beloved son-in-law unraveling before their eyes. He stammered, his charm slipping like a mask in a storm, while she stood unshaken, the embodiment of every truth he thought would remain hidden. The balance of power shifted irreversibly, his lies collapsing under their own weight, and when it was over, she did not gloat. She did not need to. His downfall was complete, his wealth dismantled, his reputation ruined, his allies gone. She walked away with her dignity intact, her silence having spoken louder than any accusation could. The family's jeers, once sharp as knives, now echoed in her memory only as a reminder of how wrong they had been. They thought I was breaking, she whispered to herself, her voice steady as stone. I was only building. That became her truth, her triumph. Not the ruins of the man who betrayed her, but the strength she had forged in his shadow. Her revenge was not loud, not cruel, but undeniable. And as she stepped into her new beginning, the final victory was clear. She had not only survived him, she had destroyed the very illusion he lived behind, and emerged stronger than he could ever comprehend. Her husband's words were careless, arrogant, and almost casual when he spoke of hidden accounts and investments no one could ever trace. He smiled, confident, convinced that the layers of deception he had built over the years were untouchable. To him, his charm and smooth delivery would shield him from scrutiny. He did not realize that in boasting so freely, he had left the first thread exposed, a weak point in a tapestry of lies he believed flawless. She heard the words and stored them, not with anger, but with a calculated awareness. Each boast was a gift, each smile a step toward her ultimate strategy. Whispers of his fortune, the rumors he thought harmless, began circulating in circles he assumed were loyal to him. Small, seemingly insignificant comments, repeated by careless associates, drifted back toward her. She listened quietly, piecing together fragments of information like a puzzle. Each snippet of truth sharpened her perception, confirming suspicions she had nurtured for months. The arrogance he displayed made his undoing inevitable. His overconfidence painted a target on every secret he held. She allowed herself no outward reaction, letting him believe his shadow had never been noticed while silently preparing to expose every hidden corner of his deceit. The revelation landed with the precision of inevitability. That single brag, so lightly offered, fit perfectly into the puzzle she had been constructing with meticulous care. Hidden bank accounts, offshore investments, and concealed expenditures all converged, forming an irrefutable narrative of his duplicity. Flashbacks of previous red flags, once dismissed as minor oddities or miscommunications, now revealed themselves as deliberate steps in his manipulation. She did not rage. She did not plead. She merely acknowledged the clarity of her understanding and allowed the strategy she had cultivated to guide her next moves. Her lawyer, aware of the delicate timing required, coordinated with a precision born of experience. Every filing was prepared to coincide with her reveal, every document cross-checked and backed by corroborating evidence. Emails, receipts, financial statements, all were aligned to strike with maximum effect. She moved with quiet confidence, feigning vulnerability and uncertainty while her legal team orchestrated the perfect exposure. Each action, each pause, each nod of consent reinforced the illusion of compliance, masking the storm that was about to descend. In court, she maintained the fragile exterior expected of a wronged ex-wife. Her husband, on the other hand, carried himself with smug superiority, convinced of his untouchability. He strutted with a predator's confidence, unaware that the very threats of arrogance he displayed were being woven into the noose tightening around him. Every glance he cast, every self-satisfied smirk, played directly into the hands of the plan she and her team had constructed. The trap, invisible to him, was complete. The moment came with the subtle inevitability of fate. His testimony, delivered with the pride of one convinced of his invincibility, became the instrument of his undoing. Each carefully concealed fact he revealed voluntarily was catalogued and referenced, exposing the lies he had relied upon for years. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as one by one, the structures of deception he had built collapsed. He realized too late that his own words were damning, and his smug confidence transformed into desperation, but it no longer mattered. The tide had turned irrevocably, tension thickened as the narrative flipped. Family members who had smirked and whispered in his favor watched in disbelief as the truth unfolded. Each revelation struck with unerring accuracy, dismantling the image of control he had so meticulously cultivated. Silence became her ally, each pause a reminder that the real power belonged to the one who had waited, planned, and observed. The once dominant figure now faltered, trapped by the very arrogance that had long been his shield. When the proceedings concluded, the weight of victory rested entirely with her. He had walked into the noose crafted from his own arrogance and lies. She did not celebrate with gloating or derision. Her triumph was quiet, complete, and undeniable. Patience, intelligence, and strategic precision had delivered a justice that was as satisfying as it was thorough. As she stepped away, leaving the remnants of his schemes behind, her own words echoed with the resonance of triumph. He walked straight into the noose I'd tied from his own lies. In that moment, she knew that true revenge had never required rage. It had required clarity, composure, and the unwavering certainty that silence and patience are often the most potent weapons of all. Her ex-husband walked into the courtroom with the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Every step, every smirk betrayed his confidence, as though the world itself existed to shield him from consequence. He had crafted an image of invincibility, a mask polished with charm and deceit, unaware that behind the composed exterior of his soon-to-be ex-wife, a quiet storm had been gathering, patient and precise. He had underestimated her, not just her intelligence, but the patience that allowed her to wait for the perfect moment. As the proceedings began, the air hummed with subtle tension. Every glance across the room carried weight. Every soft shuffle of paper seemed to echo a warning he could not yet hear. She observed quietly, her calm demeanor masking the anticipation she felt inside. Her suspicions, long nurtured by late-night phone calls, unexplained meetings, and whispered half-truths, had sharpened into clarity. She did not act hastily, instead letting the illusion of passivity and vulnerability reinforce his belief that he remained in control. The first pieces of the puzzle were laid bare as her lawyer began the methodical presentation of evidence. Each document, each message, each financial record was a thread unraveling the tapestry of lies he had so carefully woven. Offshore accounts, secret transfers, and duplicity in his personal dealings became undeniable. No hesitation, no emotional outburst, only the meticulous, unstoppable accumulation of proof that left him increasingly exposed. Memories of small betrayals flashed in her mind, subtle signs she had once questioned and dismissed, now fully understood. Each flashback reinforced the inevitability of what was unfolding. Her legal team guided the process with precision, presenting evidence in a way that required no commentary beyond what the facts themselves declared. Receipts, bank statements, emails, everything was aligned perfectly, forming a narrative so complete it could not be contested. She sat, composed and serene, a silent conductor of the inevitable collapse, as her ex-husband's world began to show the first cracks. The calm she maintained was not weakness but strategy, a quiet insistence that control had shifted without him realizing it. It was in his overconfidence that his undoing was sealed. He continued to preen, answering questions with arrogance, dismissing implications with a smug confidence that now appeared tragically misplaced. Each lie he repeated and each boast he offered only strengthened her position. By failing to recognize the depth of her preparation, he became a participant in his own exposure, a man entrapped by the very hubris he had relied upon for protection. Every smirk, every dismissive gesture had played directly into the trap she had spent months constructing. When the revelations were finally undeniable, shock rippled through the courtroom. The family members who had once whispered derision now sat stunned, forced to witness a triumph they had not anticipated. Her victory was not shouted or flaunted, it was earned through patience, observation, and relentless strategy. The impact was immediate, transforming whispers of doubt and ridicule into a profound awareness of the truth. His arrogance had been dismantled by the calm, measured persistence of the one he had sought to dismiss. As the final consequences crystallized, he found himself cornered and humiliated, stripped of both reputation and financial leverage. Every scheme he had relied upon unraveled, leaving him defenseless before the reality of his own misdeeds. She had orchestrated a justice so thorough it required no embellishment, every fact a silent blow, every exposed lie a reminder that patience and intelligence outweigh brash confidence. The courtroom, once his stage, had become the theater of his downfall. She rose from the ordeal with unshakable dignity, a quiet strength that no words could amplify but which resonated louder than any proclamation. For once, I didn't need to speak. The truth screamed louder than I ever could, she thought, a statement as much to herself as to the world. The storm she had orchestrated left her unscarred, her enemies humbled, and her own resolve solidified. In the end, victory had been claimed not through confrontation, but through patience, clarity, and the unyielding power of truth. Her ex-husband had always believed himself untouchable, the master of a carefully constructed empire built on charm, deceit, and calculated manipulation. Each boast, each casual lie, reinforced the illusion that he held the power in their fractured world. But that power was fragile, a brittle shell that had finally cracked under the weight of his own arrogance. The courtroom became the stage where his empire would collapse, and she sat with quiet composure, aware of every piece of evidence, every calculated move that would strip him bare. There was no fury in her eyes, only the calm of someone who had waited long enough to ensure inevitability. The silence in the courtroom was profound, a tense pause that seemed to stretch endlessly as the reality of his downfall began to seep in. Every gaze fixed upon him reflected subtle disbelief, the once blind loyalty now teetering on the edge of revelation. He continued to preen and posture, unaware that each glance toward him, each whispered observation, chipped away at his perceived invincibility. Meanwhile, she played her part flawlessly, the illusion of fragility masking the steel of her resolve. Nothing in the room suggested that the tables had already turned. The storm had only just begun to stir. As documents, messages, and financial records were methodically presented, the intricate web of his deception unraveled before every witness. Hidden accounts, falsified transactions, and evidence of infidelity painted a picture of a man who had relied on everyone else's ignorance to preserve his dominance. Flashbacks to their life together surfaced in her mind not as emotional triggers, but as confirmations of the patterns she had long suspected. Each calculated move she had observed in private, every subtle betrayal, now made sense. The narrative of his infallibility disintegrated, leaving only the stark truth she had known all along. He was never untouchable, and she had always been. Wright, her lawyer, a master of timing and precision, guided the courtroom through the evidence without a hint of emotion, letting the facts speak for themselves. Every bank statement, email, and receipt had been meticulously aligned to demonstrate not only his deceit but also the care with which she had prepared for this moment. The tension thickened with each presentation, and she remained calm, letting the methodical unfolding of truth replace any need for words. The trap she had set with patience and strategy had sprung perfectly. There was no escape. His overconfidence, the very shield he had wielded with pride, now became the instrument of his humiliation. Public boasts, arrogant gestures, and dismissive remarks that once intimidated others now amplified his vulnerability. Each self-aggrandizing statement was a misstep in the dance of his undoing, perfectly timed to coincide with the legal and personal revelations that stripped him of influence and power. Every smug smile, every attempt at control, only tightened the noose he had woven for himself. The final moment arrived with effortless grace. She walked away with dignity intact, never raising her voice, letting silence and the weight of truth speak on her behalf. Shock radiated across the faces of those who had once doubted her, each whisper and sidelong glance acknowledging a reality they could no longer deny. Her triumph was complete not because she had shouted victory, but because she had remained patient, calculated, and unwavering while the world around him collapsed under his own misdeeds. Whispers replaced laughter, shame replaced arrogance, and he faced the full consequence of his betrayals. Family and friends who had once marveled at his cunning now watched him stripped of authority and influence. The power he had wielded so carelessly had vanished, leaving only the stark reminder of his hubris. She did not gloat, did not speak a word to mock him. The justice was self-evident, delivered with quiet inevitability, and its impact resounded far beyond the courtroom walls. They called me a drama queen, but in the end, it was their king who lost his crown, she reflected, the words unspoken yet complete in their resonance. Every moment of patience, every ounce of strategic silence had culminated in her ultimate triumph. The storm she had orchestrated left her unbroken, her enemies humbled, and her own strength undeniable. In the end, her victory was absolute, a testament to intelligence, restraint, and the relentless power of truth.